At the previous lesson, I explained Flower data service example that contained backend and JavaScript to show data from backend, and it is within the same program. I also created projects for Angular that is getting data from this service. So just because this Angular program is getting data and also images from this program, so this doesn't contain images. Images are coming from this server. We need to run them at the same time, not literally at the same time, but service should start before when we start Angular. Otherwise, Angular won't show any data. It will be empty. Okay. So let's first open this service and make it running. So let's do so. I will close Pet Data Service. I don't want to clone it because we cloned this as the previous lesson. I will just open the project. It saves time. Anyway, if you need to clone it, you know how to clone it. Oh, it's hard to find now because I was grading this. Okay, so open. Flower Data Service Spring Boot. Okay. When I created this project, I used it the same idea as in assignment. So I selected H2 database in SQL portion, SQL. I selected data GPA also in SQL, and in web, I selected REST repository, data REST. Okay. Also, I added, in static, I have two files, Flower HTML, Index HTML, and I also have some CSS and images folder. So these images will be picked by Angular program. So Angular project doesn't have images inside, so it is picking from this server. And it's also picking data from this server. It makes sense to put them together, or at least in similar location, because when data is changing logically, we will need to update images because images are matching the data in this program. So let's start it, and I will quickly remind you what it is serving. So it has two tables. One it is for flower, and one it is for picture. And relationship is one-to-one. You know from database, when we have relationship one-to-one, we can just join it into one table, right? It's not always a good idea because technically it's two entities, but even if it is relationship one-to-one, it can be potentially just one table. I didn't do it this way, but I used similar idea. So if it is one-to-one, I can just stick data into first page, into flower, the picture related data into flower. So what did I do? In the flower entity, I have ID, label, price of the flower, define it as big decimal, description, and I have relationship to picture, one-to-one relationship, and I use cascade also. When I save flower, it will save picture. So I need to save only flower. And additionally, I added one more instruction, REST resource exported false. This will stick JSON from picture object into JSON of flower object. So when I grab data about the flower, it will provide me data about pictures of the flower. So this way, I will get data about pictures with the same request. It makes it a little bit simpler logic. Also, inside of, so this is a picture, and picture contains just two data fields, a small and large image name, and ID, which is auto-generated. I also overrode configuration, and so I'm serving flower ID. A picture ID is not necessary because I'm not retrieving data about pictures separately. I will retrieve data about flowers, so ID about flower makes sense, but not picture. Picture ID. Any questions? No? So in initializer, I created the following data. So I'm creating flower, and this constructor contains reference to picture object. So new picture, so I'm creating picture object that has two names, file names. Okay. And I'm calling save. Because cascade is all, when I save a flower object, it will save picture object to database. So it is the same idea as in the assignment, right? When we have relationship user and pets, just because we have cascade all between users and pets, when we save user, it will save pets of user. So the same as here. The difference is that when we display pets, users, it will not insert data about pets inside of users table, inside of users JSON. It will be separate address. But because I define it REST resource exported false, a JSON of flower will contain JSON of picture object. Why did I do it? Just to show that it's possible. And in some cases, it makes it simpler. You don't have this complexity at all in your assignment because you don't have pictures coming with data. Right? But it is possible. It's not difficult to get picture data separately by separate request. In this case, it is in one request for simplicity. So that was overview of the data. So let's go to localhost 8080. You see, browser remember index.html from another project. So we need to force to reload it. Control-Shift-R is forcing reload page in the browser because it is the same address, localhost 8080. So browser assume it is the same page. Now let's go to API/flowers. And you will see that it is serving me a list of flowers that will be displayed on the first page. And if I go to specific ID of a flower, for example, aster, after flowers, it will be just an object for a flower. And please notice that picture object is embedded kind of thing. It is JSON inside of JSON. This was exported false was doing. If I don't say exported false, it will be just separate, with separate address. I do have pictures served separately. So if I do pictures, okay. So there is a separate information about pictures. ID is not inserted because I didn't overwrite it, because I'm not using this data. I'm using picture data from flower objects for simplicity. So this is kind of by default, so why not? And flower repository contains this on top because it's necessary for Angular, because the JavaScript restricted by browser already covered this topic, right? And I didn't write this on top of picture object because my program is not using it. On picture repository, because my program is not sending requests there. Any questions? So I'm not describing JavaScript in this program anymore because it was described as the previous lesson, and this lesson is about Angular. Yes?
When we have the
In this case, ID is name. So if we go to flower entity, ID is a string. So I use not auto numbering, I use name of a flower as ID. It is again for simplicity. So when I go to flowers/aster, it is aster. It's for easy browsing of the data. Next, we need to keep it running because when we run client, it needs to connect to somewhere, right? So keep it running. And now I'm cloning example flower data Angular. So it is flower data Angular. Code, copy address, and I'm cloning it here. And when it's asked the same window or separate window, because we need to keep this running. So file, new, project from version control, and I need to browse to Angular section. So where's Angular? Angular. This.
Sorry, another question regarding the flower and the pictures. I'm trying flowers/aster/pictures and nothing is going on. Similar as the other one, we use the ID and then we grab the pictures that's specific for this flower. Is it because of the REST resources?
No, let me think. Just one moment. Control V. Okay, I will run clone and I will think about it. Okay, just a moment. You want to see pictures from flower link? Yeah. I think this is because we didn't export it. Yeah. Otherwise, it would be there. I think this is because we didn't export it. So instead of creating it as separate as link to picture from flower, we inserted it directly inside of the data. We can experiment, but later, okay? So as an experiment, you can just make another clone, remove this exported, and see what it does. I think it is because we said exported false, it didn't create it as a link, but instead of creating link, it is actually inserted data. This is my understanding, but it's in order to know for sure, we probably better to clone it as separate folder, remove it and see what it does. This is what I do. When it's not clear, I just experiment. So I'm cloning flower data Angular, and when it says separate window the same, trust project, definitely new window, because we need to have this running. So typically when we clone Angular, it will say run npm install, so we click run npm install. This program has 2 pages similar to your assignment. One, it is for a list of these flowers. When you click on flower, it will be detailed about flower. This is not output of Angular program. This is coming from port 8080. It is JavaScript running inside of server project. And Angular is just client project. Okay. So it says packages installed, zero vulnerabilities, cool, fine. So how did I create this project? So it was file, new project, and definitely it was Angular CLI as usual, and I added dash or minus routing. So this is how to create project with multiple pages in it. When you create a project with this way of routing, it will not create pages for you, so you need to add those pages as components. It was explained in the previous lesson when we had multiplication quiz. It is similar to multiplication quiz, except it has only 2 pages in it. And it's getting, and difference is it's getting data from web. It's not owned data. So this is how I create it, and click it create. And now I click cancel because I don't want to create. So it is running. No, I didn't run it yet, but let's browse and see what kind of stuff we have. So in APP, I have a footer. Footer is a component. Edit standard way as before, ng generate component, and I type it footer. And it created me folder footer with footer component HTML, footer component TS, and so on. The APP component was created by default. Then I added two more components. By default, they were empty when I added them, and I edited them. So I added component for flower index. It will be first page that's showing index of the flowers, like a table of the flowers. And I created flower details component. These will be my pages that I replace. After I created those pages, could be just empty, or we could put just header in it, so we know that it is inserted. I went to routing, APP routing. This file is created if you create a project with -- routing. If you don't type it, you don't have this file, but you can add it by some command line command in terminal. If I don't remember, look up, it's in documentation. So I went here and I edited this. Again, when you edit routes for Angular, those components should exist, otherwise it will say, what is that? It will underline it in red, so say it doesn't know what it is, right? So those components could be empty, and you edit them later, but they should exist when you edit this table. So I created default address, this default. So if I go to default address, it shows me index component. No, not this one. This is localhost 88. This is fake. Okay. So I need to run this project in order to make it work. All right. So, all right. So now I'm starting this. That was easy, right? Okay. Now, I'm starting Angular. It started, so I'm going to localhost 40. Now it is real Angular, right? So when I go to this address, for localhost 4200, it shows me index. So this is coming from right place. So empty, like nothing after slash, component, flower index component. So this is how it shows up. Next, flowers with inserted ID supposed to show flower details component. And this is data inside of address. So if I go with flowers and add aster, supposed to show data about aster. Okay. Okay. So how this page works? It picks ID from the address, what I type it. It figures it out, address of the data, send request for the data, and boom, we have it in here, right? So ID comes from the link. So when we go to this page, click on roses, you have it in link. Or you can even type it, as you saw, right? So this page is grabbing data from the address, either type it or from a link, and send request to the server for the data, and boom, we have data on this page. So this is the behavior, right? Okay, so this is how to create address with data, but I didn't show how to grab data inside of the component. When we open component, it will be almost obvious the part which is grabbing the data from the address line. This magic is inside of this component. And I also created none of the above address that is just redirecting to index. So redirect to index. So if it is none of the above, like anything, so if we go 42800 blah, 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 it is redirecting me to index. So this is how I defined routes, and it is a lot shorter than in example with what we had quiz example, because we have only 2 pages. Okay? Now, we have a, so let's see where this data is coming from. Data, we know where it's coming from this server, but how it's coming from. So I defined flower class to carry data. But this flower class, it is data transfer object for the GUI. So if we open this flower class, we will see it contains ID, name, which is not used here. I don't know. It's a label, price, description, link to small image, link to, no, name, which is string, of small image, name of large image. So name of small image showing here, this is for the large image. I have 2 kinds of images on the server. But this is data transfer object for the GUI. I don't have a int. It is not the object that is received. Because what is received, it is object inside of an object. It is not flat, right? Remember, when we receive it, we have some JSON related to flower and some picture object inside of it. So this is not that structure. Right? So remember that when I described jQuery program, it was just grabbing data, and I didn't define types of the data because there's no way to define types in JavaScript, right? But it is TypeScript. So when we grab data in TypeScript, in order to have like type verification, we define data classes. Idea is very similar to what we did in Android if you took Android class. You define classes of the data classes of the structure of the data that you expect. Okay. In Android, we define data classes. In this, I define interfaces. So first of all, how I added this? It is ng generate class flower, and I added up with flower. Okay. I defined interfaces for the structure of JSON. I could add them as ng generate interface and name of the interface, and I defined 3 of them. But if I would do so, it will be 3 files. But for sake of easier explanation, I put all those 3 files into 1 file and call it JSON structure. So we can have all 3 at the same time on the screen. So if those things are in separate files, it will work exactly the same. In Java, you can combine interfaces and classes in the same file. Unlike, in not Java, JavaScript, TypeScript. This is TypeScript. Okay? Not in Java, you can have only 1 public class per file. So we have these interfaces that define JSON that I'm expecting. So what do I expect? I already know. Okay, let's. Where's my localhost 8080 address? Yeah, here it is. API flowers. Okay, here it is. This is the data coming from flowers. What I'm interested in is this stuff. This is kind of garbage, blah, 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 embedded, not useful, right? So I'm interested in this stuff. I'm interested in array of flowers. So, and it is inside of this object, right, immediately. So I call this part, what starting here, as catalog.json. So catalog.json, it is the object starting here. That contains field flowers, which is array of flower objects. But I call those flower objects as flower.json because it's not the same flower object. It has different internal structure. Okay? So this is the array of flower JSON objects. And flower JSON objects are starting here where is this? Like, okay? So flower JSON object contain ID, label, price, description, and picture object, which is picture JSON object. All right? Are you with me? Okay. And what is picture JSON object? It is this part. Picture JSON object contains small and large two fields, string. Okay. So I described the data that I want to receive inside of as interfaces. If I'm not interested in something, like in this, it is not part of the picture. And as you see, it is not receiving wiki link. It was left as exercise. So if you want to play with it, make sure it is receiving wiki link, so you edit where it's supposed to be, and you show it is on the page, so when you click on it, it goes to Wikipedia. So it is exercise. This is why it is left. It is not a bug, it's a feature, okay? And it's also showing that what we are not interested in, we just omit it, and it will not cause any crashes. So it is intentional behavior. So what is next? This is description of JSON, how we receive it. So I created service, and it is called flower data service that will be injected into both pages. So when I call get flower by ID in this page, it will give me data about flower. If I call get all flowers, it will give me data about these flowers. So I created service that provides me data, and data is coming from requests sent to web. Right? So for this reason, I created flower data service. How? Ng generate service flower dash data. Okay? And it created me flower data service. So magic of network request is inside of flower data service. What is the logic of it? I'm using the same logic as use it in Android, and this is since Android is Google project and Angular is also Google project, so this is kind of the same idea. How it handles network delay. When you ask for request, when you ask for data, you can get empty object immediately and provided this to your GUI. And GUI set listener, and when data comes, listener updates the screen. So it is not coming in the library, but you can do this manipulation. In Android, it comes in library. When you ask for data, it gives you empty box. And you set listener, when data comes, you get it in the box. In this case, you create empty box yourself, and you provide it from your service. So my service is creating empty box that is given to user. Here it is. Get flower list is giving empty box that contains array of flower objects. Okay? When data comes from network, this box is populated with data, and since this box is observable by GUI, GUI will react on it and update the screen. When you ask for one item, get flower, and again, it's returning observable flower. Right? So it will give empty box immediately, and GUI will set observer on it. When data is received from the network, this service will insert real data instead of empty. And since this box is observable, it is observed by GUI. When data is received, GUI will update the screen. So it is this pattern called observer pattern, right? So this idea is used in Android a lot, and since Angular it's also Google project, so they reuse this idea. So let's see what is the magic inside of it. So when I created this service, it made it injectable by default. So okay, this is what I want. I will inject it into both components for the list page and for the details page. So I can call those methods to get observable list of flowers and to get observable flower. Okay? Observable container with potential flower inside that will be inserted when data comes. So I created constructor with HTTP client. HTTP client is injected, so I will have it. I think it is by default. If it's not by default, we need to look up documentation. So I'm not sure. So I will check it. Okay. So if this doesn't work for you, Google it. Okay. I think it is by default, but now I'm not sure. So HTTP client is injected into constructor, is dependency injection. I define it two constants, one for address of folder where my images live. It's just a folder where it will grab images. A local host 8080 images flowers. And data about all flowers. Please notice that there's no backslash in the end, because it's a difference between Spring Boot 2 and Spring Boot 3. In Spring Boot 3, if you put backslash after flowers, it will not work. In Spring Boot 2, it works either way, with backslash after flowers or without. Okay. Next, so it is just two constants. Then, since my data transfer object flower, it is not the same as flower JSON, I need some method to copy the stuff. So this is the method that is copying from flower JSON object to flower data transfer object that is used in GUI. So it is receiving flower JSON and it's returning flower type. And it is static because all data is in the parameter, inside of the parameter. So when it is receiving flower JSON object, I'm creating flower object and kind of copying it. But when when I copy image, remember that image is inside of flower JSON object. So I have to do extra step. And now I have a flat data. Also, when I copy image, it was image file, but now it is entire address. So it is location and file, because I joined in the strings, right? So it used to be just name of the file. Now it is entire address with location. So this is just to copy object and resolve address for images. So let's do it for one flower. It's simpler first. Get flower by ID, observable flower. So this, I'm creating empty container. This is empty container. And now I need to be careful because it's indeed empty. If you try to grab data from it and display it, it will cause crash. So this is indeed empty and it is given to GUI as empty. So when I display it in flower details, I have to put if flower. It means this is not null. Otherwise, trying to display something from null will cause crash. What is this? It is if, display conditionally. If you can use it with any tag, but if you don't have any logical tag for it, like div, right? If there's no need to div, you can say ng container. It is just generic. If you use div, it will create div inside of HTML. If you say ng container, it will not create anything. It will be just a condition. Okay. So again, just because it is indeed null, I don't want null.label here because it will cause crash. Okay. So this is to avoid the crash. Going back to the component. In the service, here it is. It starts with empty. Then HTTP client get from this address /ID subscribe. Now I'm listening when data comes. When data comes, it will call this Lambda function So this is lambda function inside of it. Right? So this would be data of a flower. And what happens here? I'm logging the data, and I'm inserting data inside of this subject. So this is empty container, but this next will insert this data inside of empty container. So what happens? I'm picking flower JSON object and converting this to flower because it's supposed to be flower inside. Okay? So next is inserting data inside of the container, and it is returning container. This part will be executed when data comes, so it will be delayed. So originally, it returns empty container immediately, and this will be executed later. This lambda function will be executed when data is received from the server. So it will stick the data into empty container. Okay, questions? So when I create an empty container, I use it replace subject. It is observable is interface. This is implementation. We cannot call constructor of interface, right? So this is new, and I'm calling implementation of this method. This interface observable. When I deal with the list, I use slightly different logic. Okay? I use another implementation of the observable interface, behavior subject. What is the difference? Behavior subject requires initial data. There's no constructor without initial data. So in order to do that, I'm creating empty array. So in this case, behavior subject will contain empty array. And this method will return this observable box immediately, but it won't be empty. It will contain empty array. So this is the difference. But empty array is not good. It will be populated with new data when data comes, right? So, but initially it will return empty array, so there's no delay. So if I go to flower index page, I don't need to deal with that extra precaution to avoid crash, because I can run loops through empty array. And when you run loops through empty array, it just won't run. It won't crash, but it won't run. So this is table row repeated, F through flowers. When it is empty array, it just won't repeat table row. Okay, but it won't cause crash. Okay? Questions? I will explain the rest. It is just framework, okay, idea. So let's go back to component. Go back to service and see what happens here. The same, HTTP client, get J from this address, subscribe when data comes. When data comes, it will execute this Lambda function. And what is inside of Lambda function? This is catalog JSON object, because this is what is received, dot embedded will give me catalog. What is received, dot embedded will give me this catalog. So I'm avoiding this nonsense, okay? Will give me catalog with, and catalog contains array of flowers. So this is array of flower JSON objects, items. This is array of flower JSON objects. I'm running for each loop. So this Lambda function is applied to every element of that array. Okay. No, this Lambda function for each. Am I right? Yes, it is for each starting here and ending here, right? So what happens here? I'm picking one flower, and converting this to flower JSON to flower object and pushing this to array of flowers. Okay. And when for each is done, this is for each, I'm inserting array of flowers into this container again. Previously it was empty, now I reinsert the same array to trigger observer. Otherwise observer won't be triggered because it doesn't know what is inside of the object is going on. Okay. So previously it was empty array, now I run it loop to populate it with data, and I push it the same array, but now it's not empty, to trigger observer. Okay. So this is how, and I'm returning this. But originally it will be container with empty array. And because this part, this lambda function, will be executed only when data comes, right, from this server. All right? So this is how data is received. Now, since this service is injected into both pages, I can ask for the data. So let's look up in first page, which is flower index. I have an array of flowers, which is initialized in the constructor to empty one by default. Okay. Next, flower data service is injected. And here it is. I also have a method that will be executed after constructor. So it is on init, it is initializing method. In this method, I have flower data service, get flower list. This will give me empty observable, container with empty list of flowers. Right? Container with empty list of flowers. And I'm setting observer on it. Subscribe is setting observer. So when data comes, it will execute given lambda function. And what happens? This lambda function is taking list of flowers, array of flowers, and I assign these flowers to this path. Right? And this is public variable linked to the screen. Okay? So when this assignment happens, HTML template will be triggered to update the screen because you reassign its flowers. Okay. So where is the template? Here it is, we already saw. So now it will run loop. It will create link around image with flower /ID because it will be flower, new flower each time. So those images will be linked. Image will refer to address of small image. F, it is image dot small image source, it will be address of the small image. Okay? Then I insert label, I inserted price, but price it is with pipe, so it will format it as currency with $sign and 2 digits. Okay? So this is how insert description into table. So this is how links are created. When we click on the link, it will take me, ID is address, it will take me to details page. Okay. So in details page, it is very similar. So let's quickly look at this, and it is like almost self-explanatory. So in the details page, I have injected service, and inside of method executed after constructor, I also set observer, but this observer is not on the data. It is observer on address in the command line. This one. Command line will contain parameter. Command line will contain address that will come as map. key value pairs, because potentially you may have several IDs in it. So I'm picking ID from the address line, and when this is picked, and it's not null, and now I can retrieve the data, because now I know ID. And what happens? I'm subscribing to the data, because now I know ID to where to subscribe, and when it is coming, I'm updating flower, which this is flower, describe it, display it on that page. Okay. Questions? And this means it's nullable, because you don't initialize it in constructor. You need to tell the system it's nullable. All right? And it's also precaution that original container had null, and this is nullable, so I have precaution to avoid this crash here. So don't try to read data which is null. Any questions? Yes?
So for exercise, we would add the wiki
Add table below.
stuff here. This would be the.
Exercise is not homework.
Well, I'm just.
Yeah, exercise to add okay.
The wiki link?
Okay, in original, like localhost 8080, if you go to roses, there is a Wikipedia link. And when you click it, it goes to Wikipedia. Angular version doesn't have this link. So as exercise to edit. And if you can edit, you probably understood the logic of it, right? So it is kind of check that you understood it. So it's exercise, but it's not assignment. Assignment is separate. Assignment is about pets and users. In assignment, this is a list of all users, not flowers, and this is detail links. In the user page, it will be details about user, but below it will be table of pets associated with the user, which is not here. It's extra logic, but it is kind of copy-pastable idea.
It's Spring service and Angular frontend.
Yes, service is provided.
All services provided.
Service is provided. In assignment, there is a link here. It is the example that I was explaining during the first half of the lesson.
Oh, you just want us to write the front end?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this was explained during first half of the lesson, and I video recorded. Hopefully it did work, so I will post it. It was first half of, it's example of the first half of the lesson. It is directly back end for the assignment. And the assignment to write front end. And important when you submit assignment, submit it as it is described, because it's not just zipping project and going. Because if you zip it, it will be insanely huge. It's like 100 megs. Okay? So the submission of assignment is different this time. Okay. Questions? No? If no questions, let's wrap it up. It's exactly 10 o'clock. Okay. Yes?
It's too early to ask, but I guess, is our final exam going to be using Angular?
No, I changed mine. Sorry, about the final exam, it's not Angular, because it is, for Angular, it was, you don't have enough practice to do it quickly. So for final exam, you'll have two tables. I will say which tables. It will be either one to many, many to one, or many to many. And I will ask you to create service based on these tables. And it is similarly to pet data service. Okay. So it is similar to your assignment, but only with two tables. So no Angular. I changed my mind because it takes practice to do it quickly. For assignment, it's okay because you have 2 weeks to do it. Eventually you will figure out. But for exam, it does require more practicing. Okay?
You only have so long.
Yeah. Yeah. Questions? No? For exam, you will have a Spring Boot, create service with two tables. I will describe tables. I will not provide code, I will just describe it. And it will be either one-to-many, many-to-one, or many-to-many. And repositories default without extra customized queries, just default.